Hello fellow crafters, I'm Karen and this is the compilation video of my Peppermint Christmas series. And in this video I will be compiling all of the 6 peppermint themed Christmas decoration crafts and adding a bonus section of how I did the research and design and planning stage of this set of crafts. I first decided to do the peppermint-themed Christmas decorations about a year ago, and I wanted to take the idea and not have just an explosion of circular peppermints sitting around everywhere. I wanted to take the idea a step further and sort of do some variations on the concept, and that's what these crafts are today. So the first way that I'm varying the concept is just playing with size. So I'm going to be making really big peppermints, which are standing on edge as just sort of a mantle decoration kind of item. And then I'm making really tiny peppermints that I'm going to put inside glass Christmas ball ornaments for the tree. And then I'm also going to be doing various sizes of peppermints in a hanging decoration that's just a wall hanging from a branch, and it'll have various strings of peppermints underneath. The second way that I'm going to be varying the idea is to play with the shape. So in my case, what I'm going to be doing is sort of commandeering other concepts or shapes of Christmas that we associate with the holiday and applying the red and white striped concept to it. So I'll be taking clay and twisting red and white clay together to make little icicles that are just peppermint icicles. And then I will also be taking styrofoam cones and decorating them sort of like a tree, but in layers of red and white ribbon. And that will also, I think, communicate the peppermint idea, just in that it has the red and white stripes. And then the final way that I can take a different look at peppermints is just to vary the, or take the color scheme and apply it in another way. In this case, I'm going to be doing a floral arrangement because I like to include a floral arrangement in my Christmas decorations. And I was able to find white and red wisteria flowers, fake flowers, and just by alternating those around in a circle, I'm hoping to kind of communicate the peppermint idea without being overtly peppermint. So that's the basic concept that I've been toying with over the last year and figuring out how to do, and this video will be the compilation of all of those crafts. So you can check out the individual videos if you like, and this next stage here will be the first craft. The remainder of this video is going to be a look at the crafts in hindsight, and it will give an overview of how to do each one. These clips are just excerpts from the individual videos, so for the full instructional content you'll want to check out those videos in the description. Those contain the material lists and the tool lists and show you the complete craft in detail, whereas you're just going to get a summary here. So this first craft is the trio, and your first step is going to be to cut out the circles once you've selected some thick plywood to use for the craft. I did 3 circles, and you have to cut that edge on the bottom so that they don't roll around and will stand up. Then you'll want to go ahead and paint the white background on all of your pieces. It'll probably take several coats to cover, depending on the quality of the surface of the wood. So I think mine took 3 coats. And then after that, you'll be able to go ahead and mark the red stripes. And to see how I did those stripes, you can go ahead and watch the individual video. But you'll want to measure out so you're getting them in roughly the right spot. And then you can paint the red stripes on. There are several different styles of stripes that you could do. You could just do equally sized red and white stripes, but I was able to vary this one and do wide red stripes with narrow stripes on the sides. I thought it looked a little bit fancier, so I preferred it that way. Once you're done painting, you'll want to put a coat or 2 of varnish on just to give it that little protective coating. It'll help it in the long run. And at that point, your actual peppermints are done. You could stop here if you'd like, Or you can go on, as I did, to do the candy wrapper piece. So to make the wrapper, you have to do a little bit of figuring to determine how big the fabric needs to be. You don't want to underestimate the width of it like I did on the first try. And then you can go ahead and cut the fabric. And I ironed the fabric then, which I should have done in advance of cutting. But once it's ironed, I used ribbon that I folded in half using the iron, and I hemmed the outside of the fabric just so that it wouldn't fray. It looks a lot neater with that ribbon around the edge. And then the final step is just to assemble it, which I used embroidery floss to do. Next up we have the miniature ornaments. So this was the opposite size, where we're going to the small peppermints. And the first step here is really to work your clay and create these oversized clay cylinders, one of each color. And then we'll cut down those cylinders into wedges. I did mine in 1/6, which makes 2 peppermint cylinders. You want to be pretty careful when you're working with this that you don't mix your red into the white. It does leave some color behind because of whatever dye they use to color the clay. The other thing I learned is that you want to be pretty careful when you roll the cylinders down, because the clay is pretty malleable and it will misshape. So here I am starting to roll those peppermints down into thinner cylinders of the peppermint pattern. It did lose a bit of its pattern as I did this, and I learned to be a little bit more cautious with that. But you're good as long as it still shows a red and white stripe in there. Then you just want to cut this down into little tiny slices, which are your actual final peppermints, and bake those according to the directions on the clay. Then you can pop them into your glass ornaments, and you'll want to make sure, of course, that you've measured the opening of your ornaments to make sure that the peppermints that you make will fit in there. I had a little bit of trouble with that. I was also surprised at how many of these little peppermints it takes to fill even a small ornament. It took some 30 peppermints, miniature peppermints, to fill that to about half full. So don't underestimate how many you will need to make, and assume that your clay will go really far. The final step here, which is optional, is just to add a little bit of ribbon or an accent piece to the top of the ornament. I found that this helped to make it look more full, even though the ornament itself was only about half full of peppermints. So I added some bows and then little red flowers on the outside. Our third craft here is this hanging branch. This one is my favorite of all of these peppermint crafts that I did. I think it looks the most elegant of all of them. So I went through a planning stage with the design of this, and then I had to cut and drill the little circles. So I was drilling holes for the ribbon to go through, which will hold it up. And you have to do all of your standard wood prep, so you've got your sanding and cleaning them off before you can paint them. But then you can paint, just like the large trio, you can paint the white background on all of them. I think it took me 2 coats on this set. And then you can mark the red stripes, paint them, and give them a coat of varnish. In this case, I used a slightly different pattern of red stripes. The larger ones are all painted with alternating red wide stripes and narrow stripes on the white background. The little ones are just alternating red and white stripes. You'll want to remember too that you should paint the sides, not just the front face of your peppermints. When you paint and when you varnish, you want to be careful to keep the paint and varnish out of the little holes that you've drilled as much as possible. They can be cleared out if you need to, but it's easier to leave them open so that you have less difficulty in putting the ribbon through later. After you've varnished, you can start on the assembly phase. So I cut the ribbon as I went, fed it through the peppermints from front to back, and then tied knots for each peppermint to keep it sort of in place if there were multiple on the one ribbon. This is where you want to be referencing back to your original plan, assuming you planned something that you liked. That way you can get a balanced looking pattern in your final product. The last step I did was to add some greens to this, just to sort of fill out the overall image. I think it adds a little bit to have that mixed in there. It makes it look more complete. And that is all that you need to do for this one. Our fourth craft here is probably the easiest one in the whole set. This is to make those peppermint icicles. And once you've worked the clay, you can create sort of a tapered icicle shape, but in each color. So you have to roll down your clay into cylinders. And I had to do it a couple of times from each clay ball just to get them thin enough that my final icicles would not be huge. Then you can roll them down and you put just a little bit of extra pressure on the side that you want to be thinner so that it rolls to a point. You want to create a nice even taper with your pieces. So you do that in the red and in the white, and then you can combine the pieces into the actual icicle shape, which I used 2 of each color, so a total of 4 pieces. And I bought head pins in the jewelry section of the craft store, which are just basically a little pin that has an eye at the top. So I rolled one of those head pins into each peppermint and then twisted it to show the candy cane pattern. And then once you do that, you can bake them. And that's really all there is to that one. This next one was actually a variation on my original plan. I was going to wrap peppermint pattern string around the tree from bottom to top, but in the end I decided to layer a ribbon. So you'll have to decide your increments of ribbon length. Mine are 4 inches long, and you can cut your ribbons, which I did as I went rather than doing them all up front. Then you attach rows from the bottom all the way up to the top of the cone, and we do that so that it looks right when it's layered. It's easier to build that way. If you need to, you can trim the top of your cone to make it a little bit shorter. I had to do this on the smaller of the 2 trees because the rows didn't quite line up with the top of the cone. And then you can create a tree topper. Mine are just little bows of the same ribbon that I used and then some pearls on top. But you could do anything that you would prefer. The final and optional step is to make little gifts to stack at the bottom of the tree, which I did out of cardboard that I hot glued together, wrapped in normal wrapping paper, and then just decorated with odds and ends of flowers and beads and fake berries that I had lying around, along with the ribbon that I had used in the original craft to sort of tie it all together. You could make as many of these gifts as you like. To be honest, it was a little bit more fun than making the trees themselves. And I made 7 of these gifts to go with the 2 trees. And finally, craft 6 is the shortest craft that I did of all of these. It actually only took me about an hour to do this whole one start to finish. And the first step here is that you want to plan the spacing of the flowers on the display piece. My display piece is that candle holder, but you could use anything like a basket or a dish. And once you've planned that out, you can attach the flowers to your styrofoam. I recommend using the styrofoam. It helps to hold the flowers in exactly the place you want, and you can control it a little bit better. You'll want to either eyeball carefully or measure to make sure that you get all of your flowers in the right position in your display. If it looks cramped or too separated, it won't look right in the end. So you want it to look fairly even. The goal with a floral arrangement is that it look full and complete, yet not too busy. So for this one, I added some leaves that came on the stems of the wisteria flowers that I used. And I made some homemade staples, but you could use greening pins to attach those leaves to the styrofoam. And like the flowers, you just want it to be nice and evenly spaced and sort of fill in any gaps that you may have noticed. Then I needed to fill in the little hole that had been left at the top. So I used additional flowers to do this, and then added some leaves as well in there, just using a couple of those staples to secure it. The staples I used on top I made a little bit longer so that it wouldn't force the flowers deep down into the top and allowed it to remain in the curve of the overall display. And then the last step that I did was just to secure the styrofoam into the display piece, which for me meant just adding a rod, which I used a piece of the stem, and my candle holder had a hole in the bottom, so I was able to put that stem down through the hole just to hold it in place. So here we have the completed set of Peppermint crafts, and I hope that you found the content useful for making your own. Thanks for supporting Tickled Fancy Crafting by watching this video. Click the like button to let me know that you enjoyed the content, and subscribe to see new Tickled Fancy Crafting videos in your feed. If you'd like to be informed directly about the content, ring the notifications bell. Comment with crafts that you would like to see in the future, and remember, you can make this.